everyone. Shabbat Shalom for those here in the sanctuary. Shabbat Shalom for those at home. Forgive us starting a few moments late. We had the wonderful pleasure of welcoming newish members since lockdown, since 2020, with a cup of coffee and a croissant before the service, and to really experience FPS here in the building. But now we return to our hybrid service. We welcome you at home and those here too. We're on page 117, service number 3. Our wonderful musicians, Franklin Gelnick, Natasha Kafka, leading us this morning. I'm going to invite you to stand for Matovu. Those of you who are at home, stand, sit, whatever you need to do to transform your sitting room, your kitchen, your bedroom, your garden into a sanctuary to join us. Eternal God, I love the house where your glory dwells. Humbly I worship before my God and Maker. May my prayer and our prayers be acceptable to you, eternal God, in your great kindness. Answer me with your saving truth. Let's sit down. So, aware of the richness of the portion of Torah this morning that calls us to love our neighbor, let me just share a few words about that, written in our Siddur, just as our themed reading before we begin the service. We have just enough religion to make us hate, but not enough to make us love one another. If one were given 5 minutes warning in our lives, 5 minutes to say what it all meant to us, every telephone booth would be occupied by people calling each other up to stammer that they loved them. So Rabbi Akiva wrote these words, love your neighbor as yourself, as being, he wrote, the principal idea in Torah. It is the greatest gift that we have, to love others in the way that we care for ourselves. And Ben Azai said, a greater principle could be this, that this is the book of all the descendants of Adam. For in creating all humankind, God made everyone in the divine image. We're on page 118. So, as we're aware of counting the Omer, and we enter the 3rd week of the Omer, calling us to notice beauty and balance, particularly in our lives, Tiferet, sometimes a harder task than at other times. Let's offer the morning blessings together, being aware of where we find it easy to feel gratitude in our own lives. So these talk about our bodies working, talk about our needs being met, of strength that we have, of being able to recover from sleep the night before, for strength for the new day. So whatever you need personally to add for your own kavanah, your own spiritual intention, please do so. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kufufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa li kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten li koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hama'avir shena me'enai, utnuma me'afapai. Top of page 119. Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam baruch hu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamchulal b'fi amo, meshubach u'mfa'ar, b'lshon chasidav v'avadav. בשבחות ובזמרות, לגדלך ונמליכך, מלכנו יחיד חי העולמי. ברוך אתה אדוני, מלך מחולל בתשבחות. These words at the foot of the page were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the cave at Qumran, where scrolls were found that added to our Jewish tradition. And these words, join me or listen to them or read them. With the coming of day and night, I will enter the covenant of God. And when evening and morning depart, I will recite God's decrees. God Most High, you're my righteousness. You teach me goodness. You're the fountain of knowledge, the dwelling place of holiness, summit of glory. Eternal might and majesty are yours. I will choose whatever you teach me, gladly accepting your judgments. But as soon as I move my hands and feet, I will praise your name. When I go out, when I come in, when I lie down, when I rise up, when I rest on my bed, I will sing your praise. And in the company of my friends, I will praise you with the words of my mouth. Let's stand for the Yishtabach. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול, הקדוש בשמיים ובארץ. כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שיר ושפחה, הלל וזמרה, ברכות והודאות, מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בשירי זמרה. So having welcomed each other, let's turn to page 135 as we call each other to the formal prayer part of the service.
La eternal one, our God, sovereign of the universe, maker of light and creator of darkness, author of peace and creator of all things. In your mercy you give light to the earth and all who live on it, and in your goodness you renew creation continually, day by day. How manifold are your works, O God! With wisdom have you made them all. The world is full of your creations. Your handiwork proclaims your praise. The radiant stars bear witness to your glory. We praise you, O God, creator of light. Great is your love for us, eternal God, and abundant your compassion. Our ancestors trusted in you, and you taught them the laws of life. So be gracious to us and teach us. Incline our hearts to hear your words, to know and understand, to learn and teach, and with love to uphold the truths of your Torah. Enlighten us with your teaching, make us faithful to your commandments, and wholehearted in the love and awe of your name. For in love you summon us to serve you and proclaim your unity. In love you have called your people Israel to serve you. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavecha, u'v'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol moedecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'elech, asher nohi mitzavecha hayom, al levavecha. V'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha v'veitecha, u'v'lechtecha v'aderech, u'shachpacha u'v'kumecha, u'kshatam le'ot al yadecha. V'hayu totafot bein enecha, u'katavtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'visharecha.
Lama antiskaru, vasitem et kol mitzvotai, vitem kadoshim lelohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני
good and beautiful and true, sound, established and enduring are these words, now and forever. True it is, Eternal One, that you are our sovereign God and Redeemer, as you were the God and Redeemer of our ancestors. You are our Maker, the rock of our salvation. We have known you always as our helper and our liberator. There is no God but you. Truly, you are first and you are last. We have no Redeemer but you. You redeemed us from Egypt and freed us from the house of bondage. Then, with great joy, Moses, Miriam, and all Israel together sang to you this song. Sorry, I forgot to remind you to sit down. Shira Chadasha Shibahu Geolim Le Shimcha Al Safat Hayam Yachad Kulam Hodu Vahimhu Vamru
Adonai Yimloch Leolam Va'ed Tzu Yisrael Kuma Bezrat Yisrael Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvaot Shamo Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvaot Shamo Kadosh Yisrael Baruch Atah Adonai Gal Yisrael.
Please could you stand for the prayer?
Adonai Safatai Tiftach Ufiach Yitechilatecha Adonai Safatai Tiftach Ufiach Yitechilatecha
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Velohei Avotenu V'Imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Velohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibur V'Hanora El Elyon, Gomer Hasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zoher Hasdei Avot V'Imahot, Umevi Gula Livnei V'Nehem, L'ma'an Shemo Be'achava, Melech Ozer u'Mashiach u'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mahei Meti Matah Rav u'Hoshia, Mashiv HaRuach u'Morid HaGeshem, Mazriah HaShemesh u'Morid HaTal.
Somech nofli
V'ne'eman ata l'chayot meitim, Baruch ata Adonai, Machaye hametim. Nekadesh et shimha ba'olam, Kishem shema kadishim oto bishme marom, Kakatuv al yad navi echa.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Sabaoth, Malok kol haaretz kavodo.
Kavodo mele olam.
Baruch kavod Adonai, Limkomo.
From your concealment, majestic one, reveal yourself and rule over us, for you are our hope.
Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Zion, le'tovato, Hallelujah. Le'tovato, 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 nagid gad lecha, ulenetzach netzachim, ulenetzach netzachim, kedushatcha nagdish, le'tovato, 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 nagid gad lecha, ulenetzach netzachim, ulenetzach netzachim, kedushatcha nagdish, v'shivcha Eloheinu, mepinu lo yamosh le'olam va'ed, ki el melech gadol, ki el melech gadol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Le'tovato, 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 nagid gad lecha, ulenetzach netzachim, ulenetzach netzachim, kedushatcha nagdish. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh, Ha'el, HaKadosh, Amen.
Please sit down. You inspired our ancestors to hallow this day for your service. When upon its coming we pause to contemplate our life, we learn anew that we do not live by bread alone, but also by the spiritual nourishment we receive when we open ourselves to your influence. We thank you for the Sabbath day and for the opportunity it offers to enhance the quality of our lives. We thank you for its joy and for its peace. May our worship help us to take into our hearts its message of holiness and consecrate all our days by devotion to what is true, beautiful, and good.
Yismachu v'malachutecha, shomrei, shomrei, shomrei Shabbat, korei oneg Shabbat. Yismachu v'malachutecha, shomrei, shomrei, shomrei Shabbat, korei oneg Shabbat. Am kadashei, חודש שביעי שבת, כולם יספעו ויתנגו מה טובת השבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקורא עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקורא עונג שבת, ובשביעי רצית בו וקידשתו שבת, חמדת ימים אותו קראת שבת שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקורא עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקורא עונג שבת, זכר למעשה וראשית שבת, זכר למעשה וראשית שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקורא עונג שבת, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקורא עונג שבת.
Our God and God of our ancestors, may our rest on this day be pleasing in your sight. Sanctify us by your commandments and make us loyal to your teaching. Satisfy us with your goodness, gladden us with your salvation, and purify our hearts to serve you in truth. In your gracious love, Eternal One, let the holiness of your Sabbath enter our hearts, and may all Israel who hallow your name be exalted by its peace. Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Rutzei Adonai Eloheinu b'ham har Yisrael, u'tefilatam b'hafah takabel, u'tehil l'ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha. Baruch atah Adonai she'odacha levadacha b'yirah na'avod. We give thanks that you, Eternal One, are our God, as you were the God of our ancestors. You are the rock of our life, the power that shields us in every age. We thank and praise you for our lives, which are in your hand, for our souls, which are in your keeping, for the signs of your presence we encounter every day, and for your wondrous gifts at all times, morning, noon, and night. Baruch atah Adonai hatov shimcha u'lecha na'avodot.
Shalom, Tova uvracha, Sim Shalom, Tova uvracha, Sim Shalom, Tova uvracha, Sim Shalom, Tova uvracha. Hein v'chesed, hein v'chesed v'rachamim. Hein v'chesed, hein v'chesed v'rachamim. Shalom Tova Uvracha. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Amecha. Sim Shalom. Tova uvracha. Sim Shalom Tova uvracha.
Baruch atah Adonai oseh hashalom. We'll take a moment for silent prayer.
Yehiyu l'ratzon imreifi v'heyon libi lefanecha Adonai sori Adonai Suri Virgo Ali Virgo Ali Oh say shalom shalom bimromav Uya say shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen Uya say shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amen Oh say shalom shalom bimromav Uya say shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amen
So as we turn to our Torah service this morning, page 481, the heart of our Shabbat morning service, thank you so much to Bobby for holding us through the prayers of the Shema, the Amidah, so graciously and enabling us. I always like to add occasionally a bit of poetry in the midst of our service, and I want to offer this morning's Mary Oliver's Why I Wake Early, for us all in the midst of prayer to find something to catch us as we go into our Torah service. Hello, sun in my face. Hello, you who make the morning and spread it over the fields and into the faces of the tulips and the nodding morning glories, and into the windows of even the miserable and the crotchety. Best preacher that ever was, dear star that just happens to be where you are in the universe to keep us from ever darkness, to ease us with warm touching, to hold us in the great hands of light. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Watch now how I start the day in happiness and in kindness. So we're on page 481.
Ein kamocha by Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kama'asecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha b'chol tov v'tov. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai os le'amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shamo.
Gadlu l'Adonai iti unoramama shemo yachdav.
Lecha Adonai, Hagdula v'Hagvura, v'Hatiferet v'Hanetzach v'Hachod, Ki chok b'shamayim ובארץ. לך אדוני הממלכה והמתנשא לכל הראש.
Beautiful. Thank you. We can sit down. Obviously, I love a lot of Torah, but this Torah portion today is my very second favorite of the whole of the Torah. Kedoshim is thought of as the heart of Torah, literally the middle portion in the whole of Torah, and second only in importance to the 10 sayings. We know it as the 10 Commandments. And this portion is extraordinary in a whole book of Leviticus, which even on a good day is a little bit dry. But this portion, Kedoshim, taken from the word kadosh, meaning holy, begins with the words, Kedoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai. You shall be holy because I, the Eternal, am holy. And then one expects another long list of sacrificial rites, of pious laws. But what we have here that pops out of the whole Torah, let alone Leviticus, is a list of laws of how to be decent, of how to live our lives in a way that honors and respects those around us. Even to the minutiae detail of the daily laborer, of not keeping the wages of the daily laborer overnight. Even the detail of not cursing the deaf who can't hear, or placing a stumbling block before the blind. This level of sensitivity and empathy really shine out of this portion. And I always think it's such a gift to get this portion when a Bar Bat Mitzvah student gets it. And last year our adult Bar Bat Mitzvah class did tremendous honor to this portion when they chose this portion to read from. So I'm delighted to share some of the words of Kedoshim this morning. And first, I call up our wonderful David Lewis, without whom our services would not be the hybrid slickness that we have to enable us all to pray as a community, whether you're in your own living room or here in our sanctuary. Ya'amod, David Tzvi ben Yehuda Dov, levarech et haTorah. Baruch Adonai Hamavorach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamavorach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bacharbanu mikol ha'olamim v'noten lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai
Noten HaTorah. So we're in Leviticus chapter 19. Any of you at home, Josie's sharing in the chat. If any of you have a chumash, but I'll be sure to translate these words. V'yadaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el kol adat b'nei Yisrael, v'amata eleihem, kadoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. Ish imo va'aviv tira'u, va'et shabtotai tishmaru ani Adonai Elohechem. Al tifnu el ha'elelim ve'elohe masecha lo ta'asu lachem. Ani Adonai Elohechem. So I'm going to translate in our two sections, because the way we've chosen to read in our liberal tradition is to just skip out a tiny few verses of sacrifice to hold on to the notion of menschlichkeit that shines out here. So God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the whole community of the children of Israel and say to them, 'You shall be holy because I, the Eternal One, am holy.' Everyone must respect their mother and their father." Note that this is a different order than in the Ten Commandments, that here mother comes first. And you must keep my Shabbats. You must keep my Shabbats because I am the Eternal One, your God. Do not turn away to other gods. Do not make for yourself graven images. I am the Eternal One, your God. And then we move down a few lines. Let me just find it. Uvkutrachem et katzir artzachem. לא תכלה, פאת שדך לקצור, ולקט קצירך לא תלקט, וכרמך לא תעולל, ופרת כרמך לא תלקט, לעוני ולגר תעזוב אותם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם. לא תגנבו ולא תחשו, ולא תשקרו איש בעמיתו, ולא תשבו בשמי לשקר, וחיללת את שם אלוהיך, אני אדוני. לא תעשוק את רעך, ולא תגזול, ולא תלין פעולת שכיר איתך עד בוקר. לא תקלל חרש, ולפני עיוור לא תיתן מכשול, ויראת מאלוהיך, אני אדוני. לא תעשו עוול במשפט, ולא תישא פני דל, ולא תדע פני גדול, בצדק תשפט עמיתך. לא תלך רכיל בעמיתך, לא תעמוד על דם רעך, אני אדוני. לא תשנא את אחיך בלבבך, הוכח תוכיח את עמיתך, ולא תישא אליו חטא, ולא תיקום ולא תיטור את בני עמך, ואהבת לרעך כמוך, אני אדוני. And when you harvest the fields of your lands, you should not harvest to the corners of your field. You should not pick up all the fallen grain in the corners of your field. You should not pick up any last bits of grain. Likewise, in your vineyards, you should not prune and pick all the fruit of your vineyard. You should not harvest or pick up anything that has been left fallen. Rather, you should leave it for the orphan and for the stranger to pick up for them. I am the Eternal One, your God. You should not deal falsely. You should not lie or act deceitfully. You should not steal. You should not lie or act or tell lies about your neighbor to another neighbor. You should not take my name in vain. You should not use it to swear or to curse the name of the Eternal One, your God. I am the Eternal One, your God. You should not oppress your neighbor. You should not steal from your neighbor. You should not keep the wages of the laborer with you until morning. You should not curse the deaf. You should not put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Rather, you should fear, or you should love, honor the Eternal One, your God. I am the Eternal One, your God. You should not be deceitful in acts of justice or business. You should not in any way defraud in your acts of justice. You should not raise up the poor, nor favor the rich. Rather, in justice, in tzedek, righteousness, you must judge your neighbor. You shall not gossip about any of your neighbors. You should not stand by the blood of your neighbor. I am the Eternal One, your God. That line, not standing by the blood of your neighbor, definitely is what has been understood in Jewish tradition, that you don't stand by those who are suffering. You are not allowed to ignore it. You should not hate your brother or your sister in your heart. Actually, you should reprove them. You should raise what you're upset about, which is why probably years of family therapy does so well, and many are Jewish, right? You should discuss everything, or you should reprove your brother or your sister so that you don't incur a sin on their behalf by holding that anger or hatred. You should not bear a grudge or carry a vengeance against any of your people. Rather, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Eternal. Amen. Yeshua. So I'm going to ask us to stand as we raise the Torah scroll. It should, famous last words, but it should be almost in the center, Brian. So Brian was being welcomed as a newish member of the community, and this is what we ask him to do.
Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah. Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah. Le'amor Yisrael b'kedushato.
We're just going to wrap the Torah scroll, hand it back to be dressed before I call on Anne to read Haftarah for us. Hannah, you've got your Torah scroll there, ready? Yeah? Good. Yes. Let's sit down. So Anne's coming up to read a Haftarah from the prophet Micah. And I think you'll hear that the prophet Micah really tries... You need it there. Is it in here? You not got it with you? No, it's in here. Yes, well done. Prophet Micah really tries to condense what it is to be a person of worth, a religious person, a Jew, and you'll see it echoing so beautifully from Leviticus 19.
ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher bachar v'nevi'im tovim, v'ratzah b'divreihem ha'ne'emarim be'emet. Baruch ata Adonai, bocher b'torah, uve'moshe avdo, v'Yisrael amo, uve'nevi'ei ha'emet v'sedek.
Amen.
It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Eternal shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and peoples shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Eternal, to the house of the God of Jacob, and God may teach us God's ways, and that we may walk in God's path. For out of Zion shall come forth the law and the word of the Eternal from Jerusalem. God shall judge between many peoples and shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall sit, every person under their vine and under their fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Eternal of hosts has spoken. For all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of the Eternal our God forever and ever. And in that day, declares the Eternal, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away, and those whom I have afflicted. And the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off a strong nation. And the Eternal will reign over them in Mount Zion, from this time forth and forevermore. Al HaTorah, va'al ha'avodah, va'al ha'nevi'im, va'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu, l'kedusha ve'lemenutcha, l'kavod u'letifaret, al hakol, Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach, u'mevarichim otach v'tebarach shimcha, V'fi kol chai tamid le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Yishakar, as Anne reads in honour of her father.
I'm going to ask us to all stand as we prepare to put the scrolls away, but first we offer the prayers for our community and another new member. Joan, I invite you up to the bima to read the prayer for the congregation.
Eternal God, we ask your blessing on our Queen Elizabeth and all the royal family, as well as those who govern our country. Guide them and all who govern our country with a spirit of wisdom and compassion, so that they care for the citizen and the stranger and bring benefit to all the inhabitants of our country and the world. Bless all our brothers and sisters of the house of Israel. Bless our congregation and all its members. Be with those who seek your presence and all who are in need of healing, spiritual or physical. Let them know that you are near to comfort and sustain them. May peace exist in the state of Israel soon and in our time. May you, eternal God, grant blessing to her, established as an age-old dream and home to the oppressed. May its leaders and citizens be inspired with a faithfulness to the aims of its founders, and may the country be imbued with the prophetic ideals
of liberty and justice always. May this Shabbat renew our energy to build and sustain a better world and to deepen our gratitude of so much that surrounds us. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. Welcome onto the Bima and into our community. So I just want to add the prayer for the new month. The new month of Iyar begins next week. And I think of all of us in various moments in our life, in harder moments and in easier moments. Eternal One, our God and God of our ancestors, may the new month be for us a time of renewal. Grant to each of us a long life of peace, welfare and blessing, a life of prosperity and health, a life guided by conscience, unmarred by self-reproach or shame, a life exalted by love of Torah and reverence for the divine, a life in which the longings of our hearts be fulfilled for good. May this new month give us strength, strengthen our hearts and our souls for all that we must manage in the next month, when Rosh Chodesh Iyar comes into our lives. May it be the will of the Holy One ever to be praised, that it bring for us, for the whole house of Israel, life, peace, happiness and joy, deliverance and consolation. And let us say, Amen. Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, ki nizgav shemo levado. Tov natati lechem, Torati al ta'azovu. Let's sit down. So it was a very sunny day on Tuesday, and I drove through the gates of Windsor Castle, checked by the police, of course, and allowed to park right outside St George's Chapel. And then I walked past those steps familiar to all of us from countless royal weddings and prayer services, and I walked in to the learning space behind it. I was returning to Windsor Leadership. I'd been a participant there over 3 years ago, learning leadership skills, and was returning now to teach. My task was to teach about mistakes, errors, and failures in my career that has helped me along the way. Those gates, those cobbled stones, those ancient walls focused the mind, rather, on why I was there, a Jew and a rabbi, and what I was bringing. What of my Jewish world and learning brought me there, and what could I offer to everyone else, none of whom, you won't be surprised to hear, was Jewish, or 2 were Church of England vicars. The rest were from the world of commerce and military and public sector, all trying to think creatively about how to be the best they could be in their work and in their game. And I wondered what Jewish memories and stories, as I stood there and recalled myself 3.5 years ago, what Jewish stories propel me to both to be there and in every day of my Jewish life. Thinking about how we understand our legacy as Jews, of the history, of the tradition that has come before us, and how we mark ourselves in this line of tradition now. For rabbis in the early Common Era and beyond, the Bible that we read from was not just past history, but revealed a pattern of all history to make sense of the world. It was a way of understanding the kingdom of God on earth. And that memory and understanding of what all this past tradition meant to us replaced for them in the early Common Era any notion of history. But for me, as a 21st century Jew walking into Windsor Castle, that was anything but true. Because I know it is those acts of history that have allowed me and all of us to be where we are in our world now. My families, both sides of my families, arrived at the end of the 19th century, settled here in the UK, at some point fleeing from Lithuania, from Odessa, from Poland, arriving on boats that may have stopped here in Newcastle, whilst cousins and other family continued on to Israel. Familiar stories for many of us. Arriving with little access to the vernacular here in this country, the familiar story of the huge risks associated with trying to make a new life. Goodness, how familiar that story is now as we watch people in every era, every generation. It feels like every year at the moment doing exactly the same as they come to our shores. But we are the inheritors of a tradition of inquiry, of questioning, to make our Judaism meaningful to us. Those Jews in the 19th century, before they came here, were the first who felt an imperative to examine Judaism historically, because they were no longer sure what Judaism was in the Enlightenment when they broke apart the ghetto of Judaism. They were no longer sure what Judaism was, or whatever it was, could it still be viable for them? And that is what we inherit as Jews. Whether we work in the wider world or community, whether we see ourselves exactly in the Jewish community, whether our link to the past is tenuous or is strong, that is our legacy of constantly re-evaluating how to bring tradition with us into the contemporary world we inhabit. So my participation in the establishment of Windsor Castle, invited as a rabbi with skills to impart, really was because of those 19th century Jews that decided to start looking at Judaism from the outside and how to make it relevant to us, to reassess Judaism even as they were feeling the tug to leave the old and establish new lives in the new worlds of the United States, of North America, of Israel, of here. The day after I was in Windsor Castle, and it was a great day and interesting for me to be back the second time to teach, but somehow after these years of the pandemic, after this focusing the mind on what matters, there was something even more poignant for me as I drove through those gates. But the next day, on Wednesday, two moments collided for us in our congregation. It was initially a mistake, these two things happening on the same day, but then something incredibly fortuitous came out of it. The two things that happened on Wednesday, the 27th of April, was Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Memorial Day that was added to the Jewish calendar. Wednesday night was the day that Jews all around the world, starting in Israel, marked a memory, a day devoted only to the memory of those who lost their lives in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. Initially, it was a very dramatic and audacious act that the Hebrew calendar that has been fixed for generations after the establishment of the State of Israel, an extra day was added to remember those who fell in the Holocaust. And that day was controversial and still is for the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, because nothing should be added to the calendar. The mourning day of Tisha B'Av should be enough, but that day is added, and if anyone has ever been in Israel, on that day, the 27th of Nisan, then you know that traffic stops. Bus drivers get out of their vehicles to stand for the siren that is across the whole country. And for us around the world in the diaspora, the day is important too. So you can imagine the frustration when we realized that two events had been planned, our commemorating Yom HaShoah, and the Barnet Citizens Assembly, where we in our synagogue, along with an alliance of other institutions across this, our precious borough of Barnet, where we got to call upon our elected officials and talk about what we felt as citizens from local schools and mosques and Islamic groups and other synagogues and Jewish institutions, all of us in alliance together, to ask our council, what are you going to do about mental health provisions for our teenagers? What are you going to do about settling more refugees, getting the Afghanis out of their bridging hotels into homes here in this borough? What are you going to do about clean air? I'm seeing Anne did a lot of work for the Clean Air campaign. How are we, as citizens of this council and as Jews, how are we going to contribute to a better life for those who we live amongst? Now, when we realised that the two events happened at the same time, it was initially difficult. We thought, how did we miss that in the calendar? And then, lo and behold, it became the most fortuitous, poignant, incredibly strong connection, which is this, that when we look back at the history of the Holocaust, when we look back as Jews, and for many years, for about 50 years, from the 1960s onwards, there was a concern that the Jewish community was looking too exclusively backwards towards the Holocaust, too attached to our own pain, to our own history of struggle, of victimhood, of loss. Too much concern being paid. But actually what we now realize is no. Our job is to educate our children so that they go forward knowing about the March of the Living, so that they go forward hearing the stories of survivors in their ears. But at the same time, at the very same time, as we are encouraged to remember that we were slaves and struggled in Egypt, and we remember our departure, our exodus, and are told in the Torah to remember that day for the rest of our lives. Are we, as we are told in the Torah, to remember Amalek, that tribe that were particularly cruel to us, that brought down our weak, our vulnerable ones at the back of the train through the desert? We are told to remember, to blot out their memory. These are words in Torah that we carry. And yet, if we only remember, if we only look back and light candles and listen to testimony, if that is where our remembering stops, then we are doing a disservice to those who fell before us. And there is this extraordinary message, if we choose to take it, that actually the message of Yom HaShoah, the message that comes from the story of Pesach just weeks before, that we carry this memory of our own vulnerability, of the desire and the injunction to love the stranger as ourself, if that doesn't become part of our Holocaust commemoration, then it has all been for a waste of time. This powerful way of looking at Yom HaShoah, and I see many Orthodox Jews around the world doing this now too, saying, if we remember with no function of purpose of us now, to use our memory to be at the front line of insisting on the same empathy and compassion for those who are suffering now and who need places of refuge and who need new lives that we are responsible to provide and support, then the remembering of Yom HaShoah is diminished hugely. So as we lit our candle in Middlesex University with the counsellors from Barnet around us, as we dedicated our Czech Torah scrolls last Shabbat, recalling individual names of those whose lives had been lost from the community that our scrolls came from, we are reminded that it doesn't stop with memory. It allows us to pull through and to create the strongest message possible, that no Jew who is religiously reminded of these stories and this past can respond with the words and instinct, will our country manage more people? Will our infrastructure hold? Is there space for those who are fleeing hardship? None of us can afford to respond in that way. If we are compelled to remember, to honor what came before, then we are compelled to make those connections again. We are the generation that stands between the fires of Auschwitz and the future of those who will equally be fleeing hardship. And it is us who take that responsibility. As Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, humans are not innocent bystanders in the cosmic dramas we find ourselves in. We have to use our Jewish tradition if we choose to engage with it in a live, in a living way. We have to use our Jewish tradition to remind us that actually that initial mistake of speaking to our local borough and council about what we can do for those arriving now, about how we can improve the conditions for our teenagers so that they don't suffer in silence, alone, alienated and isolated from each other. If this can help us take responsibility for our planet and the safety of those who live on it, then our remembering both our experiences of being strangers in Egypt, of being oppressed and remembering our suffering, and of the lives, the 6 million plus lives lost in the Shoah, as well as other peoples also, then if we can remember all of that, then we can use it to fire our souls to make changes in the world in which we live. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Amen. We will move now to Aleinu. Aleinu is the prayer that calls on us to imagine a world that is better, that we add to, that we contribute to. Page 520. Let's stand.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'tei gedula liyotzeh bereshit, asher zamalkeinu le'ached et shamo, v'gor aleinu lehamlich malchuto, v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu, shehu notei shamayim v'yosed haaretz u'moshev yekaro b'shamayim mima'al u'shrinatu zo v'kavei beromim hu Eloheinu einod emet malkeinu efes ulato kakatuv b'torato v'yadata hayom
v'haya Adonai lemelech ha'kol ha'aretz.
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
We turn now to Kaddish, page 524. We think of those who are mourning deaths and marking yard sites this Shabbat. We think first of the death of Anna Freeman, beloved member of this congregation, daughter of David and Sally, sister of Zach and Jamie, and her other family, her sister Rachel and brother Damien, mother Sally, father David, aunt Rosalind and Dina, the whole family. Anna, and I really want to share the words that the family have been working on this weekend. Anna's funeral will be tomorrow at 12 o'clock at Edgebury, and Shiva tomorrow night at 8 o'clock at David's family home. Anna was loved by so many people, both here in this synagogue and in all those that she knew in her life. She still is and always will be loved. She has touched so many people's lives, is remembered for that, the positive impact she had, her kindness, her caring for so many others are, as the family have deduced in this untimely death, the best example of how to create a meaningful life. I can attest to how much joy she brought to many, and I know how the family are feeling that words cannot express how much she will be missed. And a hope and a prayer that Anna is now at peace with her first love and husband, Alan. So we stand very closely in love and compassion and consolation with Anna's family. We think also of the death this week of Sidney Lipman, uncle of Josie Kinchin, Zichrono Livracha, and of the yard sites that fall this Shabbat, of Mark Harris, father of Ruth Hoffman, of Ida Navarro Palaco, mother of Renzo Fantoni, of Charles Rappaport, father of Anne Rappaport, of Margot Stone, mother of Josie Kinchin, grandmother to Paula and Tracy. Zichronam Livracha, may their memories be for a blessing, and may those who are remembering and recalling their loved ones be comforted in their loss, as we say the words of the Kaddish with them. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, b'yamad divrach yirutei, b'yamlich malchutei, b'hayachon u'v'yomechon, u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala b'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah muvorach leolam amei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ah v'yitromam v'yitnasei. V'yitada v'yitalev v'ytalal shemei dekudesha b'richu. Leila min kol berchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiram b'yama v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shamaya. V'chayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'yakol Yisrael, v'yakol b'nei Adam, v'imru, amen. Let's sit down. I'm just going to call on Roy, our treasurer, to just share a few announcements for us this morning.
Shabbat Shalom to you all, to everyone in the sanctuary and everyone at home, and particularly our new and newish members. We're very happy to see you here today. And thank you very much to all the usual support team who help us put on these wonderful services, to the tech team, David and Michael, and to Anne and Bobby particularly, who have come and helped us today with the service, and to the musicians as well. Just a few announcements about things that are happening in the community this week. We have Cafe Ivrea, our weekly discussion group, tomorrow, hosted online. Of course, everything's on the website, so you can check out the link there. On the next day, we have Rosh Chodesh, which celebrates the new moon, and we've got something called Creative in Clay, so anyone into that, we're very welcome there. And just the last one on, it's Wednesday on that.
It is, but Daniel Tao, ambassador, has changed it to Thursday. Details will be up on Facebook.
And the music as well on Thursday.
Everything is the same. Elliot Levy,
Okay.
musicians.
Yeah, so on Thursday it's changed to, it's still 8 p.m, is it? Where we're going to take advantage of a wonderfully talented Abigail and David Dolan, who are going to play us recital of music, and Elliot Levy, who will be reciting, and there will be a conversation with Daniel Taub, who is a former Israeli ambassador to the UK. So that should be a very, very interesting evening as well. So you're all very welcome to attend that, and everything will be on Zoom as well as live, so you're welcome to join on that way as well. Okay, Shabbat Shalom to you all.
Shabbat Shalom. Thanks, Roy. So let's get ready to end our service. And again, do look on Facebook page, and extra emails coming to remind you about that special event now on Thursday night, not Wednesday night, and it's at 7:30. But let us finish our service with a Don Olam on page 525. final blessing. So I'm thinking of those families in our congregation mourning, of those families with strong memories at the moment and who need strong hearts for the next days and weeks ahead. Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yavarech et amo v'shalom. Eternal God, grant strength to your people. Eternal God, bless your people with peace. Amen. So, Kiddush, everyone, is at the back of the hall. I hope enough food has been put out, but no doubt you'll be given more if it's not. And we will say Kiddush here, so those of you who are at home can join us. So, but make your way to the back of the hall now, where you can pop your books back on the shelf. Go and claim your wine and your juice. And when you're all ready, let's begin. V'shamro b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. Amen. Do you know what? Can I have a few Ivriya kids over here to just do hamotzi for us? B'nai mitzvah class, you're in my line of fire. Come, whip the cover off and do the hamotzi. Can you reach? Off you go. Off you go. Okay. Are you ready? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. B'tevon, everyone.